The sun had barely risen over the ragged spine of the Dragoon Mountains, when the desert began to shimmer, with heat lines twisting the horizon, like a mirage from some half-remembered dream. Clint McGraw, a solitary rancher known more for his silence than his temper, rode across the valley with 2 canteens slung over his saddle, and dust swirling beneath his boots. He wasn't looking for trouble. No cowboy ever was, but in the Wild West, trouble came looking for men who didn't deserve it, and that morning it found Clint in the form of 3 starving Apache warriors collapsed near a dry creek bed. Their lips were cracked, their breaths shallow, their ponies trembling from dehydration. Clint knew the unwritten law of the frontier. A man doesn't leave another soul to die in the sun, friend or enemy. So without hesitation he stepped down, uncapped his canteen, and held it to the first warrior's lips. The man drank like someone who hadn't tasted water in 2 days. The second followed, then the third, each murmuring words Clint didn't understand, but Clint didn't need to. Kindness didn't need translation. The desert wind whispered through the mesquite bushes, as if trying to warn him of something unseen. Helping Apaches was dangerous. Cowboys had been killed outright for less. But Clint wasn't the kind of man who counted the cost of doing right. He simply tied their ponies to his horse and half-carried the weakest warrior until all 3 were resting in the shade of a canyon wall. He left them extra water, a piece of jerky, and rode away, not expecting gratitude, not expecting anything. But the West had its own way of returning favors, sometimes in strange, unexpected forms. By sunset, Clint forgot about the Apaches entirely. He returned to his ranch, a lonely spread of dust and cedar fences stretching across 50 acres of hard land. The cattle needed tending, the barns needed mending. Night crept in like a slow shadow, and Clint cooked beans over the stove while coyotes howled at the rising moon. He didn't know that at that very hour, miles away, a message was being carried across Apache country, whispered from fire to fire, from rider to rider. A white man had saved 3 warriors. A cowboy had shared water, the most sacred thing in the desert. And among the Apache, such an act was not small. It was ancestral, spiritual, woven into honor as old as the mountains. A debt had been created, one not easily ignored. The next morning began like any other. Clint saddled his horse, stepped out to the corral and paused, because standing at the entrance to his ranch, silent as desert ghosts, were 25 Apache women, daughters, sisters, widows, and warriors' wives dressed in traditional buckskin, their braids adorned with beads that glimmered in the sun. Clint froze, one hand on the saddle horn. "Lord help me," he muttered under his breath. "What in the blazes is this?" The women didn't attack, didn't threaten, didn't move even a muscle. They simply stood, their faces solemn and unreadable. A young girl stepped forward, maybe 16, maybe younger, holding a clay pot filled with river water. She placed it at Clint's feet. Behind her, another woman laid down a woven blanket with tribal patterns. Another placed a string of white shell beads, a sign of honor. Clint swallowed hard. Gifts from Apaches? That was unheard of. Then the elder among them stepped forward, her eyes burning with both fire and gratitude. She lifted her chin and spoke in broken English. "Cowboy, you give water to our sons. Today, Apache women honor you. We serve to repay." Clint's jaw nearly hit the dirt. He'd given 3 men water, not expecting a thank you, and now 25 women stood, ready to repay a debt he never wanted. "Ma'am," Clint said carefully, "hands up. I appreciate this, but I don't need—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Apache pay debt, always." Her voice carried the weight of generations. "If warrior dies with unpaid honor, spirits never rest." Clint scratched the back of his neck. Spirits honor debts. He understood cattle and fences, not ancient tribal customs. But the women stood firm, an entire group of silent, determined faces refusing to leave until the debt was balanced. And so, with the dust swirling around his boots and the morning sun climbing higher, Clint realized something he'd never imagined. A simple act of kindness had tied him to an entire tribe. As the moments stretched, Clint noticed their state, tired, hungry and dusty from a long journey. His ranch wasn't prepared for guests, let alone 25 of them. The place barely had enough food for him, but the Apache elder pressed her palm to her heart and said, "You help ours, we help yours. Ranch now under our protection." Protection! In the Wild West, that meant something. A lone cowboy with Apache protection. Folks in town would faint dead on the spot. Clint sighed, wiping sweat from his brow as he looked at the women. Strong, silent figures waiting for his acceptance. He wasn't a man who rejected kindness any more than he rejected offering it. "All right," he finally said, "but only because I don't want trouble between our people. You can camp on the north field. There's shade and water." The elder nodded once, respectfully. The women moved like a coordinated village, setting up temporary shelters. Gathering firewood, preparing food, working with speed and unity Clint had never witnessed. By afternoon, his ranch, once quiet as an empty canyon, was alive with movement and soft Apache chants. Clint stood at the porch, arms crossed, staring in disbelief at the transformation. He didn't know that deeper in the mountains. The Apache chief himself had heard the story of the water the cowboy gave, and he was already preparing to visit the ranch personally. And when he arrived, everything in Clint McGraw's life would change forever. The sun drifted higher over the ranch as the Apache women settled into the north field, moving with a quiet purpose that Clint couldn't quite understand. They wove temporary shelters from cedar branches and buffalo hides, arranged stones into cooking pits, and gathered mesquite for firewood. Their movements were graceful yet efficient, like watching the wind carve patterns into the desert sand. Clint leaned on the porch rail, hat tipped back, stunned at how quickly his world had changed. Yesterday, he had been a solitary cowboy mending fences. Today, he was hosting 25 of the fiercest tribe's women on his land, and had no idea what that meant for his future. Every few minutes, one of the women would glance his way. Not fearful, not hostile, simply observing. Clint wasn't used to being watched so closely. He spat into the dirt and muttered, "This here's gonna be a long day." Around noon, the young girl from earlier, thin, sharp-eyed, carrying the clay pot, approached him again. She spoke softly but with confidence. "Elders say cowboy must eat." She handed him a bowl of cooked maize and rabbit, steam drifting from the rim. Clint blinked. Thank you," he said, taking it carefully. She nodded and stepped back without a smile, as though emotion was something sacred, not given freely. He ate slowly, watching the distant mountains like they held answers he couldn't see. Why had the tribe sent women? If it had been warriors, he'd know what to expect. But this was something else entirely. Honor, repayment, service, protection. The elder's words echoed in his mind like hoofbeats on stone. As the day stretched on, Clint noticed the women weren't just camping. They were working for him. 2 repaired his broken corral rail with a strength he didn't expect. 3 gathered herbs and left them drying on his porch. 1 cleaned the water troughs without being asked. A group of them swept the barn area like they'd lived there for years. And 1 older woman stood near the cattle, humming a low, steady melody that seemed to calm the animals themselves. Clint walked over slowly. "You don't have to do all that," he said. The elder only glanced at him with an expression carved by age and dust. Apache repaid debt with hands, not words. Clint sighed. He didn't know much about tribes, but he did know stubborn people, and these women were as stubborn as desert stone. Telling them to leave would likely spark more trouble than letting them stay. The afternoon wind picked up, sending dust spiraling across the plain. The sky darkened slightly, not with clouds, but with a shift in the air. A subtle tension Clint recognized well. Something was coming. Something big, dangerous, or meaningful. In the West, you learned to read the world like scripture, or you didn't live long. And the feeling got stronger as the sun dipped lower. Just before dusk, Clint's horse lifted its head sharply. The cattle grew restless. The Apache women stiffened, turning toward the east hills. The elder muttered something under her breath. Then Clint heard it, the distant, rhythmic thunder of hooves. Not 1 rider, not 2, many. Dust rose on the horizon like a storm front. Clint instinctively reached for his rifle, leaning by the porch. The Apache women did not run or hide. They stood firm, forming a half-circle facing the riders, their faces unreadable. Not fear, not aggression, something deeper. Respect, maybe, anticipation. As the riders approached, their silhouettes sharpened. Painted ponies, feathered lances, bows slung over bare backs, warriors, at least a dozen of them, possibly more. Clint swallowed hard. This was the meeting he hadn't prepared for. The hoofbeats slowed as the riders formed a wide arc around the north field. The largest among them, a tall warrior with streaks of white paint across his cheeks and a headdress of raven feathers, dismounted with the steadiness of a man who feared nothing beneath the sky. The Apache women bowed their heads slightly. Clint felt his palms sweat. The warrior stepped forward. He wasn't young. Lines carved his face from years of sun, war, and leadership. His presence was heavy, commanding. This was no ordinary fighter. This was the Apache chief. He studied Clint for a long moment, eyes sharp as obsidian knives. "You are McGraw," the chief said, his voice deep as canyon thunder. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. Clint nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir." "Clint McGraw." The chief placed his hand on his chest. "I am Chief Dasodahai of the Chiricahua Apache." His gaze hardened. "3 of my warriors would have died in the desert sun. You gave them water. Water is life. Life is spirit. You gave them both." Clint didn't know what to say. Words suddenly felt small. The chief continued. "Among my people, a man who saves another's spirit becomes part of the fire circle. He is not Apache by blood, but Apache by honor." Clint shifted uneasily. "I didn't do it for anything. They just needed help." "And you helped," the chief said. "That is why we are here." He motioned to the group of women. "These are our widows, sisters, and daughters, women who suffered from raids, hunger, and the endless war between our people and yours. They seek peace. You saved our warriors. So they have come to repay you. They protect your land. They work your ranch. They watch your back." Clint's heart hammered. "Chief, with respect, this is too much. Folks in town will think I've lost my mind. Or worse, they'll think I'm collaborating with—" The chief cut him off sharply. "Let them think. The desert does not care what townspeople whisper. A man who chooses honor chooses the stronger path." Clint blinked, surprised by the firm wisdom in the chief's words. Then the chief stepped closer, his shadow falling across Clint's boots. "Cowboy, you now carry Apache debt and Apache loyalty. Both are heavy." Clint felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders, like a saddle filled with iron. The chief lifted his chin toward the women. "Their presence means no enemy will cross your land. Any man who threatens you threatens the Apache." Clint ran a hand across his jaw. "Chief, I didn't ask for all this." The chief stared at him fiercely. "You did not ask. But you earned it." Silence fell between them, thick as desert heat. Then slowly, the chief extended his hand, warrior to warrior, leader to leader, man to man. Clint hesitated only a moment before shaking it. And in that handshake, something unspoken passed between them. A bond of honor, unbreakable as old mountain stone. As the last rays of sun burned orange across the land, the chief stepped back, mounted his horse, and raised his arm. The Apache warriors turned as one, disappearing into the desert like spirits returning to the dust. The women remained, and Clint realized, too late, that his life had now crossed. A line no cowboy ever expected to cross. A line where kindness had become destiny, and destiny was riding straight toward him, fast as a wildfire.